You know, going into this movie, I thought if it's not good, at least it's gonna be so bad it's good in that Batman and Robin kind of way. But the more I think about this movie, just the more I don't like it. Thor Love and Thunder. So Thor Love and Thunder is the second Thor film directed by Taika Waititi. He directed Thor Ragnarok and now he's back again for Thor Love and Thunder and is the fourth standalone Thor film that we've gotten in the MCU as a whole. And what happened? My streak is ruined. I've been going to see so many movies this summer starting with Top Gun and they've all been great. And now Thor Love and Thunder comes out and it just ruins my streak. I was going so well. There were so many great surprises, but well, here we are. But I guess I should start at the beginning because I feel like my take on this Thor movie is going to be a fairly unpopular opinion. A lot of people still really enjoy the Marvel movies, even though I would say they haven't really made a home run Marvel movie since Endgame. And as someone who's followed the MCU since the very beginning, I still have no real idea where this phase is going, and Thor Love and Thunder doesn't help with that at all. But that being said, there is enjoyment to be had in Thor Love and Thunder because if you just turn your brain off and you treat this as kind of a road trip comedy with MCU characters and don't take it so seriously, it's kind of a fun ride. It's got some nice moments of action and a lot of jokes. This is a comedy first and foremost and an MCU movie second. So the jokes are the primary focus of this whole movie. Everything in this movie is setting up a joke, paying off a joke. It's all jokes. And if you're in the mood for a comedy, if you just want to laugh, have fun. You'll enjoy this movie. But for me, I require a little bit more than some cheap laughs to really get invested in an MCU movie, especially when this movie tries to at times take itself seriously and touches on themes of cancer and grief and love and romance. And that's not to say a comedy can't have those serious moments, but you have to transition them well, or at least transition them abruptly in a way that's funny, that kind of makes fun of the transition itself in that meta sort of way. And Thor Love and Thunder really doesn't. The transitions are very awkward and kind of clumsy, and at times you feel like you just got transported into a completely separate movie than the movie that you were watching previously. And this is your spoiler warning from here on out because I'm going to be talking about this movie in detail because there are just things in this movie that I need to talk about and I need to address because the more I think about it, the more it just bugs me and it kind of breaks the world and it does real damage to the characters and I can't talk about that in the way I want to in a spoiler-free setting. So if you've already seen the movie, stick around, and if you haven't, well, you know, stick around anyway if you don't care about spoilers. But if you do, maybe just let this one go until it arrives on Disney Plus. Maybe watch it there and then come back. And, you know, I'm still here. The video will still be up. And after that disclaimer, for those of you who are still here, let's talk about some spoilers. So, Gore surprised me. I did not expect to like Gore because the pictures came out and I'm like, oh, he doesn't really look like Gore. He just looks like Christian Bale mixed with Kratos from God of War. It didn't look right. It looked kind of lazy, but seeing him in action, I'm like, okay, he's still not Gore from the comics, but he is an interesting character in and of himself. And Christian Bale is acting his heart out here because you can really tell he's trying, even under all that makeup, to give a good, convincing performance. And for a while I was thinking, okay, this movie's going to be pretty good. You see him lose his daughter, you see him go to the gods for help, and they just kind of spit in his face, so he goes all god butcher and he, you know, loses his mind. I'm like, okay, solid villain motivation set up. We're good. We're on a good track for some good storytelling, I said, hopefully not realizing where this movie would go. But then the movie shifts and we focus on Thor himself, you know, palling around with the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is where we last saw him. And it's cool to see him with the Guardians, seeing them interact and bounce off each other for the short time that they're in this movie. I really wish they were given a bit more to do and some more screen time because I like Chris Pratt as Star-Lord and Drax and Groot and Rocket. I love those guys, and whenever they're on screen I'm like, okay, here's some really clever character-based comedy that's coming our way. And for the most part that's what we get, the only exception being Thor himself, you know, the titular character. He doesn't feel like Thor in this movie, or at least not the Thor of Ragnarok and Infinity War and Endgame. This Thor feels a lot more like the bro Thor that we saw at the beginning of Thor 1. when he wasn't worthy of any hammer and he had a lot to learn and he wasn't even really a hero. He was just a dude that wanted to wipe out frost giants because they were monsters and he didn't really care about collateral damage. And what I love about that first movie is Thor's character arc, where he goes from that bro Thor into a proper sacrificial hero, the hero that lays his life down for the ants that are so far beneath him. And the foundation that was laid in that character persisted through the Avengers and Thor the Dark World, Avengers 2, Endgame, Infinity War, and Thor Ragnarok. That was who Thor was at his core, and now he just wrecks stuff. And you could make the argument that that's because he's lost his way, he's got no motivation in life anymore, but he's still worthy enough to pick up Mjolnir when he's given the opportunity. So is this considered a regression of character or not? Or is this just who Thor's supposed to be in Taika Waititi's eyes? And that's why it feels like such a betrayal of character when Thor just destroys this sanctuary idol palace thing that's made of glass and it just crumbles to the ground. And yeah, it's kind of funny in the moment, the wide eyes of the priests that are like, oh, you destroyed our most sacred place. But then you think about it for a minute and you're like, the Thor of Thor 1 through Ragnarok would not have done that. He would have found a way to mitigate the collateral damage. He wouldn't just run in there guns blazing and just wreck everything. And you see that persist throughout the majority of the runtime with absolutely no consequences given to him. And what's sad is there was an opportunity to address that in at least some small way when they go to Omnipotent City and they see just how pompous and arrogant and full of themselves the gods, especially Zeus, has grown, and that they don't care about humans or the lesser beings or anybody except for themselves and their own safety. And maybe this would have been a moment for Thor to reflect, and he's like, oh, maybe I'm regressing too, because I used to think that way and then I changed, but now I seem to be going back, and maybe there's something I can do to fix it. But nope, we just got to get naked Thor butt for the ladies and move on. But I'm already jumping around too much, because before that quest ever happens, Jane has cancer. Yeah, remember I said that this movie has some tone issues? Yeah, Jane is dying of stage 4 cancer. It's never really explained what kind of cancer. And it would be an interesting question to ask that maybe the cancer was caused by either contact with Thor and the Bifrost and all that transporting, or maybe Asgard itself, or maybe the ether that was kind of eating her alive in Thor the Dark World. She's just got vague cancer, and it's played fairly serious, and at times it just doesn't match the tone of all the wacky Thor Asgardian shenanigans when we're brought back down to Jane is dying of cancer, remember that. But in her desperation, she goes to New Asgard and she finds Thor's busted up old hammer, Mjolnir, and it sparks and twinkles at her, and all of a sudden she has the powers of Thor. We don't really see her get the powers, we just see her save the day a few scenes later in New Asgard in the full getup, and Thor sees her and doesn't really know who she is until she takes off the helmet, and boom, it's Jane, and there's this big moment together, and then the movie has to then explain what happened, because after Doctor Strange it seems to be the Marvel way to tell and not show, because in a movie that's funded by Disney with more money than anybody in the world, and a director that specializes in memorable visuals, you're just gonna have them talk about it and not actually show it. Okay, that's fine. But anyway, following the Mighty Thor comic run of 2018-ish, I don't really remember, she now has the power of Thor, because why not adapt arguably the worst run of Thor comics ever printed? A run that only lasted a short time, and then they had to undo everything that they did in that run to kind of save the franchise. Sounds like a winning solution to me. But actually, if I'm being honest, this movie does handle the Lady Thor idea a bit better than the comic did. They keep Thor as having the powers of Thor, and he's still Thor, but now he just has this other Thor that pals around with him, and they go on adventures, and Thor and Jane, and there's romance there. So it's actually handled decently, even though there are a lot of rom-com cliches thrown in there, but sometimes it's funny. But not everything is great, because even though Jane, when she has the hammer, looks awesome and healthy and it looks like Mjolnir is doing the trick, it's actually making the cancer develop faster whenever she powers down. So Mjolnir is actually killing her, which in my head makes absolutely no sense, because in one of the 3 flashbacks/recaps that are in this movie, they make it very clear that Thor cast a spell on Mjolnir to take care of Jane and watch over her. So if that's true, if that's why Mjolnir called out to Jane and gave her the powers of Thor in order to presumably fight the cancer, why would that also harm Jane in the process? That feels very counterproductive. And at first when the doctor said, oh, something might be hindering your body's ability to fight the cancer, my brain immediately went to the hammer because of course, but then I was thinking, no, it can't be the hammer because she had stage 4 cancer and was dying well before Mjolnir called out to her. So obviously her body wasn't fighting the cancer well leading up to that. So even within the timeline of the movie itself, that doesn't make sense. So I kept thinking back to, oh, maybe it is the ether, or maybe it's contact with Thor and the Bifrost. Maybe there's something toxic about the Thor and Jane relationship that is killing her. But no, it's just the hammer. It doesn't really make that much sense. But even if we were to go with that, wouldn't it be really awesome if they treated Jane's relationship with Mjolnir like Spider-Man's relationship with the black suit, you know, where it's kind of like an addiction. He knows it's not good for him, but he does it anyway because he likes to feel the power. Once I accepted that it was Mjolnir that was causing Jane's sickness to grow, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept thinking, okay, maybe Jane's got this addiction. It's this toxic relationship. She just can't help herself but pick up the hammer again. But the movie doesn't really earn that. Yeah, she picks up the hammer one last time and saves Thor, but it's not out of any kind of addiction or conflict within her. It's just that, well, it's the noble thing to do. I gotta be a superhero, so I gotta do it and save Thor. The movie just kept disappointing me so much with this story that I was like, oh, they missed that opportunity, now they missed that opportunity, now they missed that. And speaking of missed opportunities, what did they do to Valkyrie in this movie? The last time we saw her, Thor was like, Asgard needs a king, and you know, you seem like the right woman for the job. For king. I don't know why they just didn't make her a queen. That just, I don't know, makes more sense in my brain, but okay, she's the king. She's going to lead these people. In Ragnarok, they made it clear that she's got a good head on her shoulders. She's good in a fight. She understands the people. Go for it. And now we see her here, and she's just kind of miserable. She's turned New Asgard into this tourist trap, and she's walking around the people like she just rolled out of bed. There's no regality in her outfit. She doesn't command any kind of respect or authority in how she presents herself. And throughout this movie, I just don't see her as an effective ruler, and it seems like she doesn't really want to lead anyway. Because when they go on this adventure, she's like, yeah, I'd much rather just have my weapons and go out and fight people. So if that's true, then why does the movie keep putting her in this leadership role that she clearly doesn't want? When the Asgardians are squabbling amongst themselves and it's her moment to really command the room and come up with a plan, she doesn't do it. Thor steps in, you know, dressed like, you know, the mighty Thor with his big axe, and he commands the room, and he gives a big speech and motivates them. And he does in about 2 seconds what Valkyrie should have done to begin with. But they can't give Thor any big, proud moments, because I guess Taika Waititi now just sees Thor as a big joke, as a goofball, as the butt of pretty much every joke, including the jokes about his butt. So when he leaves, he commands the Bifrost, and he just blows a hole in the Asgardian town hall, and everyone's just like, Thor, you big idiot. And then he pops out, you know, out by the water, and he crashes something else. Even more collateral damage that Thor should have been more conscientious of given his history. And I'm serious when I say that they made Thor into this big joke, that they made him this parody of toxic masculinity, because that's what he exudes and that's what all the jokes are based on. And there's this weird love triangle between Thor, Mjolnir, and Stormbreaker that actually ends up being a love square when Thunderbolt comes in the picture, you know, Zeus's big lightning bolt. And it'd be pretty funny if they made a joke where Thor was ogling a new weapon and the old weapon is just kind of comes around like a jealous girlfriend. That's a pretty funny setup for a joke, but when it happens throughout the whole movie and there are scenes just dedicated to Thor talking with his weapons as if that's the other love story, and you're supposed to kind of take that seriously, even though that love square is never really resolved. They just kind of forget about it when it's convenient. I just don't get it. Are we just not supposed to take anything seriously anymore? Is it the Gremlins 2 of the Thor universe where you're just supposed to throw back your head and laugh? Because if that's true, why does Natalie Portman have such serious scenes with her dealing with cancer? And why is Christian Bale as Gore trying to win an Oscar? But anyway, things really get moving along when Gore kidnaps a bunch of his guardian children and Thor needs to assemble a team, you know, Valkyrie and Jane and Korg, and they're gonna go off and rescue the children. But they can't just go off and rescue them, because then we'd only have about a half an hour long movie, even though there's not just one but 2 super weapons. You know, you have Mjolnir and Stormbreaker, and that should be enough to fight the Necro Sword, which Gore uses to kill the gods. So they take a detour to Omnipotent City, where we see Zeus and other Greek gods and other alien gods. And there are some pretty funny jokes and moments that come from it. Russell Crowe as Zeus actually made me laugh a few times, mostly because of his accent. It's just very strange and surreal to have this not great Greek accent coming out of his mouth. I don't know, I just wasn't expecting it. But it's actually here where I would like to have some things explained. And the big one is, what does it take to kill a god? Because there are some very mixed messages here. For one, we know that Asgardians are considered gods and they're even welcome at Omnipotent City, but they're considered lesser gods, which I assume means that they don't bleed the gold body paint that the higher up gods do when they get, stabbed or killed. So okay, Asgardians considered gods, but they're not, immortal. But then you have gods like Zeus and the Olympians that are, I assume, the higher gods that do bleed gold when they're stabbed or get their throat cut or whatever. But then it begs the question, what's the point of the Necro Sword that the God Butcher has? They say that if you have that sword, you then have the power to kill gods, implying that that's the god's one weakness, that this sword has some magical ability to wipe out the immortality that's imbued in the gods. But if that's true, we see Thor and Valkyrie and Jane and Korg just killing these other gods, and we see the gold blood spraying everywhere, and they just have regular weapons. I mean, they have Mjolnir and Stormbreaker. I wouldn't call them regular weapons, but they don't have the Necro Sword. They don't have that power that everyone's supposed to be so afraid of. So if the Asgardians can kill those gods, does Gore even really need the Necro Sword to be doing what he's doing? Could he use another weapon or find something else if that sword were to ever be broken? That kind of breaks the movie, doesn't it? But don't think too hard about that, because we've got screaming goats. Remember, that was a internet meme, and I wasn't about to go on a tangent about the screaming goats, but here it is. The goats, they keep flip-flopping between kind of funny and really annoying, and I don't really know how I feel about them. I just know that they don't work nearly as well as I think Taika Waititi hoped. But now the race is on. They've got Zeus's lightning bolt for some reason. I guess they needed it, even though Thor doesn't really use it later in the movie. When Stormbreaker comes back, he just kind of gives it to Valkyrie. She doesn't really use it that much. I honestly don't really remember what even happened to the lightning bolts by the end of the movie. So they confront Gore and they rescue the kids, and Gore kind of has a little bit of a redemption arc at the end that I don't really buy, considering just how evil and corrupted he looked throughout the majority of this movie. But before I talk about the resolution with Gore in this movie, there is yet another massive missed opportunity, and it has to do with the rescuing of these kids. You have Thor and Jane, past lovers reunited. They both have the powers of Thor, and they're really the ones leading this mission to rescue kids. And this movie could have been a commentary on masculine and feminine approaches to saving children, because, parents, kids, there's a family dynamic there. Even if they're not their birth kids, you could still make that connection. They still have a certain parental responsibility to them and to make sure that they come home safe. And there's a lot of really good storytelling potential there. You have Thor, who traditionally has been depicted as the apex masculine ideal, and now you have a female version of that, and maybe play into the femininity more, and maybe show some of the classic differences that men and women take in raising children, and maybe that brings them together and solidifies their relationship. Because let's be honest, the relationship between Jane Foster and Thor has never been the strongest element in the Thor movies, so this really could have done a lot, and yet again the movie just does not take advantage of this opportunity at all. And I'm just sitting there thinking, come on guys, this is the third or fourth storyline that has just presented itself to you, and you just said, no, I'm good, I just want to make a comedy. When this could have been so much more than that. You can still have your comedy. Thor Ragnarok had comedy, but it still had a decent storyline. It had a message, it had a character arc for Thor, of him moving past the restraints of old Asgard. But here the direction just feels so aimless and lost, and I don't really know how much of each element to get that invested to, because almost nothing actually pays off. And on top of that, Jane dies in the end because, the cancer got to her. She just couldn't hold on, and she dissolves into the pixie dust, and she goes to Valhalla. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't think that they would actually kill off Jane Foster. I thought they would find some way to use eternity and have him grant the wish that Jane Foster's cancer be healed, and she'll be back and she'll be the new Thor going forward. Because if there's something Marvel has established right now, is that all the main Avengers now have either gender flopped or race swapped versions of them taking over in the next few phases. And I just assumed that Jane Foster Thor would follow suit. But no, they do kill her off, which does raise a few questions. One, that This movie has a very strange relationship with death because there are just a couple too many fake out deaths where you think people are going to die and they don't. That being Zeus and Korg and Lady Sif. They live even though they've been mortally wounded in some way, and at some points you think, oh, are they gonna die? And you actually get invested for a second, and then they renege on that and they're actually not dead and they're still alive, and you're like, okay, cool. But with Jane, the one character that I thought they were going to desperately try to save by the end of this movie, she just dies. Which ultimately makes this idea of a female Thor, of Jane Foster being Thor, feel kind of meaningless. She was only Thor for a very short time, and then she dies, and there's not really a potential for more stories with her in the future. So why even do that in the first place? And I can't help but think that if you're gonna introduce a new Thor in this universe, wouldn't the first choice be Beta Ray Bill? Because he's been in the comics a lot longer and has gone on a lot more adventures than Jane Foster ever did. And the fact that he's got a freaking horse face lends itself to the kind of wacky antics of Taika Waititi. I don't know, I feel like that would have flowed better. You could have kept him alive. You didn't have this ticking clock of cancer. You could have had Thor forge a hammer for Beta Ray Bill out of Zeus's lightning bolt or some other way. I don't know, I'm just coming up with ideas off the top of my head. So that he has more of an original identity, that he's not so tethered to original Thor, because that is a problem that I have with Jane Foster as Thor. She just feels like kind of the rejected parts of Thor built into a character, because they didn't even give her her own hammer. She has the sad looking busted up hammer that Thor has since upgraded from, so she doesn't even get like a fresh new hammer. She's got this old one that breaks into pieces, and yeah, the effect with it breaking into pieces is cool, and it does have a different element of hammer combat, but when she's holding this hammer, it's all cracked and it looks kind of janky. I just feel like Jane isn't given the same love and care of her own identity that she probably should, and seeing her wield and get her power from this busted, rejected hammer is just evidence of that. But then there's the actual ending of this movie. Gorr wishes to have his daughter back instead of killing off all the gods, because Thor really got to him and he's found his humanity again. But he's dying, which would have been nice to know earlier in the movie and maybe have that be part of the motivation why he's going around murdering gods. But no, it's only brought up in about the last minute of his life, and then he dies, which leaves this daughter fatherless. So then Thor takes her in and raises her, and now we see that Thor, Love, and Thunder are actually the names of the daughter and Thor, which is just really stupid. And I don't know why they felt the need to give Thor a daughter. It doesn't seem like that's something Thor wanted or was ever set up to have. It just kind of fell into his lap, and now he's like, oh, I guess I have to raise this daughter. Good thing he didn't kill all the gods, but now I gotta teach her how to fight and, you know, do things. And it just kind of ends the movie on a very forced and rushed note that, I don't know, I just didn't like. And those are pretty much my thoughts on Thor, Love, and Thunder. When I first walked out of the movie, I was like, okay, it wasn't great. It's got some pretty significant problems, but I laughed, you know, I thought some of the jokes were really funny. It had some good energy, a good pace to it. But then I got in the car and drove and spent the rest of my day and slept on it. And what's happened with this movie for me is what's been happening with pretty much every Marvel movie after Endgame, where the more I think about it, the more I find things that I don't like. And it's not like I'm looking for them. I want to like the MCU. I've liked it for a long time, but now all the stuff that's coming out just seem kind of lazy and sloppy and just doesn't feel true to who the characters were either in the comics or even in the MCU as have been established. And when they keep doing that over and over again, it makes it really hard for me to get excited for the next Marvel project, because I'm like, well, is it going to be Avengers or is it going to be Eternals? It's anybody's guess at this point. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't really know what else to say at this point, but I really hope Marvel gets their act together and starts having some kind of direction for their characters, because right now it just feels like they're floundering. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Thor, Love, and Thunder? Did you like it? I honestly hope you did, because it just did not work for me. But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.